But I'm going back. Because I'm like a terrier. It's got his teeth into something, not going to let go. Back to the 100,000 verse Prajna Paramita Sutra. We can't just, if we're living in Tibet 100 years ago, we can just cut right through that. Yeah, it makes sense, sure, the great lamas have achieved that. The great Mahasiddhas of India, sure, Buddha achieved that, sure, But this is a lot to bite off. Okay, achieving high states of concentration. Okay, that's imaginable. That there might be a form realm. Okay, maybe so. Possible, quite plausible. But then you settle in meditative equipoise in the fourth jhana. It's called the perfection of mindfulness. You've transcended any fluctuations of pleasure, let alone discomfort. It's just like a vast ocean of equanimity. Okay, it's very, very even. It's like this is objectivity. This is real objectivity. No perturbations, no imbalances. Sheer equanimity, the feeling of equanimity. The mind is profoundly unperturbed in this fourth jhana, this highest dimension within the form realm. And then he says, you experience numerous types of paranormal abilities. It's just not obvious what the logical connection between these two is at all. So you've achieved a state of profound equanimity and your mind is absorbed in the form realm. But what does that have to do with you can cause even the earth to quake, etc.? Where is the connection? And as I quoted Arthur C. Clarke before, any level of technology sufficiently advanced and not understood looks like magic. This looks like magic. How can how can it look like anything but magic? Such that you either believe it, or you're really devout Buddhist, do you have faith? You have faith? Okay, I believe. Or you're a modern person, you're saying, I'm not good at blind faith. What? Tectonic plates cause the earth to quake. How could the fourth jhana cause the earth to quake? I don't see the logical connection. Right? So let's linger here. I'm not in a hurry. Because this is a brilliant man writing this. He's no dope. He's no village, country bumpkin that just believes everything he's told. He's brilliant. And of course he's speaking in the line with Atisha and Nagarjuna and Shantideva. Right? This is like, he's writing in the 17th century. That's like 2,000 years in the Buddhist tradition of people saying this again and again and again from generation to generation and saying, oh, by the way, the Hindus can do this, the Taoists can do this, shamans can do this. We all know, right? And yet we don't know. This kind of looks like, are you kidding me? So let's just pause for a moment and just shift to something that this is not. Okay? Some of you have had at least some instruction in dream yoga. Okay? You remember? So you become lucid. You cut through and suddenly you have this radical shift of perspective on the same events, but it's totally different because now you were in the dream of the dream and taking everything to be real and objective within the dream and responding accordingly. And now, with the same dream, suddenly your perspective is shifted and you're looking at the whole dream from a perspective of being awake. You know you're dreaming, so you are in fact awake. And yet the dream continues. Now, once you stabilize that, how do you stabilize that? When people first have lucid dreams, they become very excited. I've had lucid dreams. A lot of people, many people have. And the first thing is, oh boy, and then you wake up. Like a number of you who reported to me, oh, I had this really good meditation, and I got really excited, and then it was over. And then I wanted again. How do I get that back? It's very common in meditative experiences and lucid dreams. You get excited, and then it's gone. Or the conceptual mind says, I'll take that. I'll figure this one out. And then it's like an elephant trying to explore a mouse with its foot. Lightly, I just want to touch it lightly. Oh. So the first thing is, see if anything rings a bell here. The first thing is relax. So you're lucid. Yeah, whatever. Sure, people get lucid all the time. No big deal. Sure, I'm lucid. So first relax. But then don't just fall back into non-lucidity. Don't lose the dream. Maintain continuity. So of the dream and of your awareness that it is a dream. Maintain stability, continuity. So you continue dreaming and continue your awareness that it is a dream. So that's your next big one. In other words, more lab time. More lab time. This is the best lab in the universe for exploring the mind. Because everything in the dream is mind-made. This is the best lab, right? But then it would be also good if it's not a dull, blurry, vague, nebulous kind of dream. It would be good if it's like high-definition dream, right? Really clear, razor sharp. So it would be good if you're very relaxed, stable, and clear. Anything ring a bell? Ring a bell? This is why Stephen Berge years ago asked me to come and co-teach with him. We did it 6 times. He's an expert on lucid dreaming. I know something about Shamatha. Because he could see, we both saw this, but this is kind of obvious. If you really want to become good at lucid dreaming, dream yoga, then for heaven's sakes, develop your shamatha skills. It makes the mind serviceable in the daytime and the nighttime. Relaxed, stable, and clear. But now once you've done that, let's imagine now you've fused your shamatha with a little bit of Vipashyana. This is insight after all, to recognize the dream as a dream. That is nighttime Vipashyana. What else do we call it? That's knowing reality as it is. You didn't before, and now you do. Hallelujah. You're awake. Right? But now in dream yoga, this enters into a second whole phase of the practice. It's a real discipline, and it's at least about 1,000 years old. And the discipline is now emanation and transformation. Within the context of the lucid dream, you now, and this is not an ego trip, it's to really explore the nature of the dream reality by interacting with it. It can be an ego trip if that's your motivation, but that's not the motivation of the great dream yogis of history, like Padmasambhava, Naropa, and so forth. You learn the nature of reality by interacting with it, working with it, testing its malleability, and so forth. By emanation, projecting yourself within the dream, transforming the dream, transforming yourself in the dream, and just seeing how malleable is dream reality. Is there anything that is objectively real, anything that's subjectively inherently existent in that whole matrix of subject-object within the dream? Is there anything that is tough, gnarly, unmovable, or is everything malleable, right? You explore that. Well, you explore that by, for example, in a dream, why not? See if you can cause an earthquake. That shouldn't be too hard. In a dream, why not? You could do that. It shouldn't be very hard at all, actually. You could cause an earthquake. You could transform one to many. That's one of the classic practices. Transform your one form into many forms. Or transform others, one thing, into many forms. A tree into a forest. One chicken into a whole flock of chickens, and so forth. And then transform many to one, a whole forest to one tree. Transform many of your forms back into one. This is just standard exercise, right, within dream yoga. You experience becoming visible and invisible. Easy peasy. That's no problem. In a dream? Why not? You can do that. No big deal, right? You pass through walls. That's one of the first tests I give my students when they get lucid. See if you can walk through a wall. Standard procedure. And as you probably know, they get halfway through, they get stuck. I've lost so many students that way. They're still stuck. Happily, that's not true. But then they have to learn, how do you, because they're lucid enough to get into the wall, and they're not lucid enough to get through it, because their mind goes into seizure mode and say, but it's a wall, and then they get stuck right in the middle of the wall. Very uncomfortable. And they have to figure out how to get out. Well, generally they just wake up and say, hell with it. And then they develop ingenious methods, and you probably heard some of them. Walk through the wall backwards. That works. Because you don't know when it's supposed to get firm, and so you're through it before you even know it. Some people try running, like Harry Potter. See how that works out. And some people, when they really get more lucid, they just walk through it. Because they know there's no wall there. It's an appearance of a wall, stupid. There are no molecules there, there's no wall. There's no body, this is an appearance of a body. This is like one rainbow penetrating another rainbow. One mirage, what's the problem? You just walk right through it. Right. So you experiment with that. All of this is just kind of like ordinary in dream yoga. Oh, you pass through fences, of course, wall, fence. Pass through mountains, sure. In a dream, why not? Do it, sure. You can move about with an unimpeded body like a bird in the sky. That's one of the easiest things to do in a lucid dream. Fly. Most people can. A few Italians can't, I understand, but most people can. I'm just teasing. You move through space in a cross-legged position. In a dream, sure, why not? You don't need to flap your wings. There's no air anyway. So what would be the point of flapping wings with no air? You can also breathe underwater. That should be no problem, because there's no oxygen under the water and there's no oxygen above the water, so it should make no difference, right? Because there's no air and you're not breathing, but you certainly can feel like it. Oh, you can move up through the earth and down into the earth as if moving through water. Sure, happens all the time. That's easy to do. I mean, when you get adept. You walk upon water without sinking? Sure. What's the problem? As if proceeding on land, you billow forth smoke and blaze with light like a bonfire. Yeah, why not? You can. And in a dream, have you ever had the sun or the moon appear in the dream? Any reason why you couldn't reach out and stroke it? No, why not? Nice sun. Oh, nice moon. Why not? Okay? But of course we know that's a dream. Nobody's being foolish here. We're not saying dreams are the same as the waking state. They're not. We know that. From our perspective of being non-lucid in the waking state, we know that. Yeah, we know that. We're all awake. And the Buddha says, yeah, right. And yet in Atisha's 7-point mind training, after he makes a brief reference to the preliminary practices, and in the old edition, there's one reference to making the mind serviceable with shamatha. That was edited out later, but it's useful. When he goes into ultimate bodhicitta, he's starting the main practice. Main practice, he has 7 mind training, right? The first line of the first of the 7 mind training, I guess it's the second because you have the preliminaries, is Chunam milam tapurta, view phenomena as if they were dreams. That's the very first one. He's going right into ultimate bodhicitta, right into wisdom, right into Vipashyana, and he doesn't say, start doing an analysis of yourself, whether you're one or many, or your body or mind. He doesn't do that. He can do anything he likes. But he doesn't start from the inside. He doesn't start by probing into the nature of the mind, its origins, location, and destination. He starts by saying, look, see appearances? View them as if they were dreams. That's where he starts. Now, he didn't say view them as dreams, because then you'd be a bit psychotic, right? If you can't tell the difference between waking reality and dreaming, you're pretty messed up. You're delusional, right? Because they're not the same. But he says, as if, milam tabur, like dreams, as if they were dreams. And of course, and he was one of the great Madhyamaka masters of India, where, according to the middle way view of Nagarjuna, it is said that all phenomena of the waking state do not exist from their own side, by their own nature, any more than they do in dreams. In the dreams, phenomena appear to exist from their own side. The mountains, the people, and so forth appear to be over there, and they're not. There is nothing over there existing from its own side, any more than there's someone over here from my side within the dream who's really here. Now, from the waking perspective, once we awaken from the dream and we look back on the dream, we say, oh yeah, for sure, definitely. I didn't just go off and visit another city and meet with my dead grandma and so forth and so on. No, they weren't really there. From the waking perspective, it's totally straightforward. 20/20 vision, hindsight. But if we're in the midst of a non-lucid dream, we're having a conversation with our dead grandma, and we're visiting someplace, it could be 1,000 miles away, that's because we're taking everything literally. We're taking appearances at face value. I see grandma over there, she must be over there. She's talking to me, I'm shaking, I'm giving her a hug. She's there, right? Until you're awake, you look back and say, no, she wasn't, right? And the Buddha, Nagarjuna, are saying, from an awakening perspective, gosh, you people, your experience is a lot like a dream. Why don't you start viewing it as such? Why don't you start to approximate a perspective that's more like ours? Because we see things as they are. Like a dream, not as a dream. Like a dream, in the waking experience, all of these appearances seem to be from their own side. The objects seem to be entirely from their own side, and I'm simply witnessing them. And the daytime dream yoga teachings, the teachings of Nagarjuna and so forth, say, view waking experiences as if they are a dream. But this raises the interesting question. I'm trying to approach this very objectively. I'm not trying to persuade you to take this literally. I'm looking at an incredible statement and trying to make sense of it. That's all I would hope for. that this isn't just like magic. It's not magic. It's either true or false. That's all that really matters. It's true or false. If it's true, if it's false, this is just a boring. There's so much falsehood after it. Just follow the American election, you get all the falsehood you could hope for. So if it's false, this is of no interest at all. Just read fairy tales, whatever, science fiction. If this is true, how on earth could it be true? How can we see beyond a magical perspective to this being something sensible, something meaningful? In other words, to what extent is waking experience like a dream? In what manner is it similar? In what manner is it dissimilar? Because nobody's saying they're the same. But what fashion is similar? Right? That would be the interesting question. So, to make sense of this, we'll recall that Karma Chagmé said that it's not only bodhisattvas or vidyadharas, highly realized beings that have these abilities. In fact, it's just sheer technology. There's no reference to wisdom here at all. Wisdom of identitylessness with 3 marks of existence, no reference whatsoever to insight into emptiness. That's why he said, non-Buddhist, shamans and so forth, you can have other kind of views, but if you simply achieve this technology, the 4th jhana, then you can, on that basis, you can develop these cities. How on earth does that occur? Where's the connection? If you've cultivated faultless shamatha alone in the achievement of the 4th jhana, such realizations occur. Well, there's no way of interpreting that except for that's exactly what he means. And they're achieved by Buddhists, non-Buddhists, and so on. So, what he's saying is that, as we saw, a basically identical statement in the Pali Canon. That was remarkable. It's almost verbatim. You remember? Even touching, caressing the sun and the moon. Everything else there was basically, it looked like it was just a photocopy from the Pali Canon, the Buddhist teachings about this in the Digha Nikaya. And then 1,000 years later, after a 1,000-year database of people achieving these, the 4th jhana, and displaying these abilities, then Buddhaghosa compiling the first 1,000 years of the Theravada tradition, systematizing it, and giving a wealth of stories, of accounts of people actually achieving these and demonstrating these abilities. I mean, that's really remarkable. But what's more remarkable and what really caught my attention when I was reading this for the first time, while I was in guidance, under the guidance of Balangoda Ananda Maitreya, and then in my between sessions I was studying Visuddhimagga and studying this. I thought, wow, this is a technology the likes of which I've never seen before. Now, what is common between the worldview that we in modernity accept and that of the Shravakas? Because this is something Shravakas achieved. Don't need realization of emptiness, don't need bodhisattva, let alone Dzogchen or any of that. And what's a common denominator between our general worldview nowadays, the worldview of science, and the worldview of the Shravakas, and the worldview in which these abilities can be developed? Okay, is there any common denominator? And the answer is yes. Whether you're a Shravaka, you're a non-Buddhist, or you're a most type of scientist, almost all, living in the modern world, you assume, as Einstein did, for example, that there's a real world out there that exists in and of itself, and we're exploring it. It's called metaphysical realism. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. It's extremely important, because if you'd like to understand Madhyamaka and the theme of emptiness, you have to understand metaphysical realism, by that name or any other name, but you have to know what it refers to. It's exactly the target. Okay? And so, just a brief reminder, naive realism, and I don't think I know any naive realists, think that the colors are really out there, independently of eyeballs, and the sounds and so forth and so on. That's how they appear to be, and people who are completely philosophically uncritical and don't give any thought to it, they will think, well, the trees are really green. They're just green. Look, they are green. The green is way out there. I just photographed the green of the trees way over there. And the sound of the music is in the air, and smells are in the air, and so forth. And if one is unsophisticated, naive, and hasn't given it any real serious thought, that's how things appear. So you say, well, that's it. So you're a naive realist. I don't know anybody, any intelligent, well-educated person who thinks that. But then there's metaphysical realism. And here's what this is, and see how similar this, how familiar this sounds. This is from Hilary Putnam, his words, and he just passed away last month, about one month ago, at the age of 90. He's really, I think, well, he earned my enormous respect. He was, for years at Harvard, one of the clearest thinking, insightful philosophers of mind, philosophers of mathematics, philosophers of science, I think, in the modern era. He was really very brilliant, and I've read him quite extensively with great admiration. Here's how he defines metaphysical realism, which he critiqued. He said, metaphysical realism is the view that, 1, the world consists of mind-independent objects. The world, the universe, it's out there already. Basically the 6-day plan. It's already done, then we came along. Okay? Whether you believe in the Bible or not, it's already there. No Bible? Okay. Big Bang, 13.8 billion years, and here we are. But it was here before we were. Homo sapiens sapiens, 200,000 years. Universe, 13.8 billion. So one was a done deal before we ever showed up. Very same theme as the Bible, just a longer time span, right? So the world consists of mind-independent objects. There's the ideal of objectivity. Ideal of objectivity. For most of the history of science, like the first 250 years, they were looking for the God's eye perspective, and that is, what's out there when we're not looking? They recognized, Descartes, Galilei, they all recognized colors arising independence about our eyes and our sounds on our ears, and so on. They recognized that. So they knew that these appearances, these qualia, colors, sounds, smells, tastes, warmth, coolness, and so forth, they're not out there. They arise relative to our sensory perceptions, and if you were a bat, you're a cockroach, you're a bumblebee, you're a dog, and so forth, you'd be living in another kind of world as far as you're concerned. Because your appearances will be arising independence upon your brain, your sensory faculty. They knew this a long time ago, 400 years ago. Not so interesting if what you want to know is the nature of reality as God sees it. What's really going on outside of our anthropocentric bubble, right? This is what Galileo was after, to know the mind of the Creator by way of the creation, and that continues to be the driving force behind science today, apart from practical applications and so forth, is what's really going on with no allusion to God, but simply what's going on when we're not looking. The Higgs boson, recently discovered almost certainly, with the Large Hadron Super Collider. If they thought that Bose, I just said it, Bose hadron? Thank you. Say it again. Higgs boson, thank you, Higgs boson. If they thought that the Higgs boson exists only relative to the Large Hadron Super Collider, that it's simply arising relative to that, was that really worth $7 billion? They're assuming that that was already there. Because this is the God particle. This is the particle in the universe that's responsible for providing all other particles with mass. In other words, that's a big deal. He got a Nobel Prize. Not by predicting something that would be an artifact of the Large Hadron Super Collider. So they're assuming it was already out there and they discovered it with this very expensive machine. And Higgs, the Scottish physicist, predicted it 50 years or so before they discovered it. But they're assuming it was already there and they discovered it. That's metaphysical realism. That it was already there and we finally discovered what was already there, independent of any observation. Mind independent, independent of super colliders. Already there. That's okay, that's metaphysical realism. For those of you who studied Madhyamaka, this is inherently existent by its own side. Exactly what they mean. The Higgs boson, they discovered it because it was inherently existing independently of any machine and any conceptual framework. We just got it right, and then gave it a label after a Scottish physicist. There's the first point. The world consists of mind-independent objects. Here's the second point. These are really juicy and really to the point. There is exactly one true and complete description of the way the world is. It's already out there, and so if you're describing it, like blind men looking at the elephant, well, one person might get one, the botanists are getting one piece and the geologists are getting another piece. But if you put all those pieces together, they're like a jigsaw puzzle. You're coming together, you're converging upon the one true, complete representation of that was already there, and that was the universe. And that's the ideal of many scientists. It gives them a sense of being a part of a larger whole. That although I will do science only for 40 years, I will add my contribution, and future generations will come to approximate the complete vision of reality. Physicists thought they were already there at the end of the late 19th century. And whoops, not quite. But they thought they had it already figured out. But that's the second point. There's exactly one true and complete description of the way the world already is. And the third one is, truth involves some sort of truth. Do Higgs boson exist or not? There's a true statement there. Yes or no. Truth, true statements, involves some sort of correspondence between an independently existent world and a description of it. Your description is valid if it corresponds to what is out there independently of your description. Right? That was really, I think, very succinctly stated. So what's really out there? I hope this is getting exciting for you. This is hot stuff, right? So what's out there when no one's looking? When we look, we see all the familiar stuff, but it's all anthropocentric. You know, if you have blurry vision, what you see is a whole bunch of blurry stuff out there. It's not out there, it's arising because you have old eyes and so on. So what's really out there? Well, Descartes, Galileo, they grappled with this 400 years ago. And Descartes said, look, there are secondary qualities, and these are ones that are arising relative to your own sensory faculties. But of course, there's something really out there. God created it, after all. They all believe this. It was done before we ever came along. So what does God see? What's out there when nobody's looking, except for God, because He's always looking? What's really out there? And he said the primary attributes, the primary qualities. Secondary are relative to a dog, a cat, a goldfish, a bumblebee, and so forth. And so, whatever. But what's out there when nobody's looking? Independent of anybody looking. What's really out there? And Descartes came up with, concluded, primary qualities are thought to be properties of objects that are independent of any observer, such as solidity, the solidity of a glass. You can be a bumblebee, you can be a porpoise, you can be anything you like, but still solid. That's independent of any observation. That's what Descartes says. There's the first one, solidity. Doesn't matter who you are, who's looking, how you're looking, it's already solid. That's the way it is. Okay, that solidity is one. Extension, how big is it? Well, it doesn't matter what your perspective is, it's this big and no bigger. Whoever's looking at it, this is how big it is. This is its shape, this is extension, right? Motion. Doesn't matter whether you see it or not. You could die of an asteroid hitting your house while you're fast asleep. It was in motion, you didn't see it coming, you're still dead. It was in motion whether you looked at it or not, right? Motion. It's really out there. And then number, how many glasses? Doesn't matter what you think, doesn't matter who's looking, there's a certain number. Figures, I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, but I think maybe shape would be a good possibility. These characteristics convey facts. They exist in the thing itself. How's that? A nice, clear, reference to the Buddha's notion of svabhava, inherent existence. That's it. They exist in the thing itself. I'm holding an inherently existent glass here, holding inherently existent water. They can be determined with certainty, I am, and do not rely on subjective judgments. It doesn't. Voila, the glass. Really there, from its own side. And call it whatever you like. You can call it a shmorbo, you can call it anything you like, it doesn't matter. It is what it is, and whatever you think about it, you'll label it, and so forth. It doesn't matter. If I throw it at you, you're going to get wet. You can think dry all you like, you're still wet and bruised. So that's really juicy. Now, is there anything left out of that picture? Because this is now widely accepted even to this day. What's really out there? Democritus, 2,500 years ago, said particles in motion. That's pretty much the view now. Elementary particles in motion, but let's add fields. There are electromagnetic fields, gravitational fields, and so forth. So, okay, particles and fields. That's what's out there when nobody's looking. There's space-time, that's out there, nobody looking, doesn't make any difference. Space-time, particles, fields. That's what's really out there. And they have no color, they're soundless, they have no odor, they have no taste, and they're not warm or cold. They have no qualia at all. They're just particles and fields. They're absolutely objective. And you can measure them objectively. And you can know with certainty what's really absolutely out there, independent of any observation. And that's what the world consists of. And read any book on cosmology, and you'll find the history of that. Started with a big bang, don't quite know how it started, but can't have everything. It started, and then particles and fields, space-time, expanding, and here we are. And we are, as I went to a planetarium, where was it just recently? Oh, in Los Angeles, this beautiful planetarium. And the astronomers love saying this, it's so poetic. We are stardust. Human beings are made of stardust. And of course they're equating a human being with a human being's body. Because after all, that's what's real. That's what's real. That's what's real is your body. Is anything left out of this picture? Because now I've read whole textbooks. I studied cosmology, not high level, but I did study it. And I told you before, study textbook of cosmology, I read multiple ones. And there is, it's the history of the physical universe. And they're presenting it as being complete, with no reference to mind and no reference to consciousness anywhere. In the whole book, it never comes up. It's just particles, fields, space-time, and then all configurations from photons up to galactic clusters, and black holes and white dwarfs and supernovas and the seven dwarfs, all kinds of things. But it's all physical. Is anything left out that might be significant? Well, Sigmund Freud had a comment about this, and I quote, and he wrote this about 90 years ago. The problem of a world constitution that takes no account of the mental apparatus by which we perceive it. I want you to hang on every word here. I'm going to read it from the beginning. The problem of a world constitution, a worldview, a depiction of the universe, right? That takes no account of the mental apparatus by which we perceive it, that excludes the mind, is an empty abstraction of no practical interest. You've just described a fictitious world. Stephen Hawking, thank you. And all the other great cosmologists. You've come up with a great story of a universe that does not exist anywhere. Because there is no universe that anyone knows anything about that's devoid of mind, devoid of consciousness. And that's the one they've described. Devoid of consciousness, devoid of mind. That's what they've described. Mind doesn't play in at all. There is no explanation for how it starts, what caused it. There's no explanation if it has any role, they ignore it. There's no explanation of the origins of consciousness at all. They've described a fictitious universe that is purely material. And we know of no such universe, because the only universes or worlds that we know of are the ones of which we're aware. Those are the only ones. The only universe we know of is one in which mind is present, is operative. And it's by means of this mental apparatus that we know about the universe. To exclude that from your description of the universe is crazy. That's crazy. And he says there's no practical interest, because you're describing a fictitious world. It may be very good for hedonia, and it is. It may be very good for developing technology. It's been fantastic. But you described a world that doesn't exist, because there is no world that anybody knows anything about that's devoid of mind. And you skip that part. This is of no practical interest, he says. But then one might, if one is me, say, but doesn't this mean that your whole science is an illusion? That your whole scientific worldview is an illusion? Because you're describing something you're describing a universe that is absolutely objective with no subjective element at all. It's like describing left with no reference to right, up with no down. You're describing object with no subjects. That doesn't make any sense. How could you describe left without right, north without south? It makes no sense, because you can't have north without south. You can't have object without subjects. So imagine geography that said only north exists. It makes no sense. And yet they're describing a universe where only objects exist. And then after 300 years of this, we have William James, Wilhelm Wundt, and something coming along and say, well, maybe we'll lift out something. Oh yeah, I know, mind. Maybe we should include mind. And what's happened ever since then? Two things have happened. They don't know what to do with this critter. They just don't know what to do with this pesky nuisance of something that was overlooked for 300 years And so they do one of two things. This is cognitive science across the boards. They either equate mind in general and consciousness in particular with something that is objective, that they do understand, brain activity, functions of brain activity, emergent properties of brain activity. But in no case is there any compelling evidence that that equation is actually true. They just say it, like calling the tail of a dog a leg. There's no evidence that it is. But if you've got a tail and you just don't know what to do with it, and you do know about legs, it kind of looks like a leg. What the hell, just call it a leg. And so if you don't know really anything about the nature of mind, because you refuse to look at it, professionally refuse to look at it, oh, what the hell, just equate mind with something you do understand and get on with it. And you know something about behavior. So the behavior said mind is simply a disposition for behavior. Something they could understand. They just said, well, hell with it. Mind is a disposition for behavior. And they got away with that for about 50 years. Until the brain scientists said, we can equate it with something else. We can equate mind with brain. And of course they had more money, and so they got the microphone. So mind is the brain now. Everybody's saying the mind is the brain. Why? Because they got the microphone. Why is Trump famous? Because he has a microphone. Not because he's saying anything intelligent whatsoever. But he has the microphone. You could put Mickey Mouse in front of the microphone. He would still get nominated. Faster than Donald Trump. Because he's... I won't comment. Who gets the microphone? Who gets the funding? They're the ones that the media covers. And it's mutually empowering. So there's one of the two routes. If you don't know what to do with mind and nature, don't know what to do with consciousness and nature, number one, you can wait for extraterrestrials to tell us. Good luck with that. Or you can just say, oh, the hell with it. Just call it something. Call it an integrated information system. Call it brain activity. Call it a neuron. Just call it something we know about and stop so we can get on with other things. That's one thing. But with no evidence that it actually is equivalent. You just say it, right? And then everybody else says it. And then everybody knows, oh, because they said it, you know. And then the other possibility is, just say it doesn't exist at all. If it's not equivalent to something physical, then the hell with it, it just doesn't exist at all. And as I said before, we have major physicists and neuroscientists and psychologists and philosophers that get so exasperated with trying to equate the mind with something physical, which it isn't, that you said, well, hell with it, that doesn't exist at all. Mind doesn't exist. Experiences don't exist. Appearances don't exist. They're not physical. And so let's just say they don't exist. Why don't we just agree? Right? That's what has been happening for the last 100 years in the cognitive sciences. And the persistent refusal to actually look at the mind. So Freud says, but don't think science is an illusion. No, our science is not an illusion. He just said it was, right? He just said it's of no practical interest. But then he wants to salvage science because he's not religious. In fact, he makes a big point. This is called future of illusion. Religion is an illusion, in his view. So he says, no, our science is not an illusion. What would be an illusion would be to think that we might obtain elsewhere that which science cannot give us. So better wait for extraterrestrials than look for something outside of science. And this was written in 1927. This is the future of an illusion. So there's really been no progress at all. I mean, it's an objective fact. There's been no progress on understanding the nature of the mind-body relationship for the last 90 years. There's been no progress in actually understanding the nature of consciousness, its origins, how it interfaces with the brain, what happens at death. There's actually been no. I mean, they like to do a song and a dance. Like, we're making some progress. And they say, what? And then you get this resounding silence. 90 years of failure, and they're still saying, don't look outside, because it will make us look stupid. If those funky Tibetan yogis and Indian yogis and Taoist monks and so forth, if they've learned something we haven't, and they didn't even use any technology, we look like idiots. Let's just assume, let's continue to assume that nobody knows anything about this except for us. And if we know nothing, that means nobody knows anything. And we'll just study the brains and behavior of contemplatives. So that's what's been happening so far. So consider these wild, it's 6:05, I really love this. I'm not going to let go. It's not that I want to beat up on materialism, it's boring. But this statement, this is not boring. You can fly through the air, you can walk through walls, you can make the earth tremble, you can caress the sun. It gives me a sunburn just to think about it. And I can't even imagine what that would be, that great big ball of nuclear reactions. Nice sun. And yet, these are not crazy people. The Buddha himself said it. We don't like that. People who are apologetists for the Buddha, no, he didn't say that. He was rational and empirical. He was basically like 20 cents. He was kind of like us. No, he wasn't. He wasn't like us at all. He said that. What do? Run for the hills. Buddhism is hocus pocus, mumbo jumbo crap. We can make a song out of that, What do? So there's a possibility the Buddha was actually delusional. He had a delusional breakdown on the night of his enlightenment, and out of that he's had a massive influence on the most sophisticated cultures of all of Asia, for 2,500 years, and now his message has gone global, and all because of a person who's fundamentally psychotic. That's a possibility, but I don't really find that to be a possibility. That just doesn't make any sense to me, but he did say this. We can like it or lump it. So I think that's impossible. And if it were just one person, but when it's so many others that are not just reporting it, but allegedly they've achieved this, demonstrated and so forth, then to say then it has to be a great conspiracy to fool us. It was 2,500 years to fool the white people. I find that just a waste of time, and we are fooling ourselves. We don't need any help from outside. So I think conspiracy theory, silly. That the Buddha was psychotic, no, it just doesn't wash, no. And Nagarjuna and Asanga and Atisha and Shantideva and Tsongkhapa and Padmasambhava and Milarepa and Naropa and Karma Chagmé and the Lama Mipam Rinpoche and His Holiness Dalai Lama, he accepts all of this, of course. That they're all psychotic and we're the only sane ones? That doesn't strike me as reasonable. And so, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. Sherlock Holmes. Or also known as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. But what on earth is the truth? Because I find it completely ridiculous to think that the Buddha was psychotic and he made all of China psychotic and India and Southeast Asia and me. Me too. I mean, that I can believe, but all of the rest of them being, I can't believe that. And so how can we make this plausible? How can we make this sensible? And something that doesn't depict the Buddha as being psychotic, and yet doesn't insult our intelligence. Because I'm not interested in doing either one. When I was growing up in a Christian family, and I heard things from Christian doctrine, it didn't make any sense to me. And I said, well, we just take this on faith. I said, yeah, but then why did God give me this intelligence? If not to use it, to trash it as soon as I hear something implausible, then why did God give us intelligence? I never got any answer for that. So, kept on looking. That's not a denunciation of Christianity at all. It's just I found, from my perspective, certain statements that made no sense to me at all. That's self-narrative. So tomorrow, we'll begin to look at something plausible. And if you'd like to see the background, it would take you some work, maybe not during this retreat. Look into Buddhaghosa. Look into the technology, the type of contemplative technology, the jhana technology that is needed in the Shravakayana context to develop those cities. It's not just achieve the fourth jhana and you become Superman. Oh, it's arduous. When I read about that, I said, oh my God. There's a large Hadron Super Collider over here. That was an enormous amount of work and money, but so much work and intelligence, 3,000 people working there. And this, wow, this is inexpensive, but this, wow, the training for this was mind-blowing to develop these abilities. But I won't go into all the details of that, but I will start weaving this together to make this actually intelligible. That this is technology, it's not magic, it's not religious belief, it's not superstition. We'll see. Stay tuned. See you tomorrow.